David woke up to a claw carefully tracing a scar on his back. His eyes opened to Alaris's room, and the dimness made it hard for him to see much, but his nerves shot off a pulse at the sensation of Alaris's focus, causing his body to shake a bit as different muscles pulled and contracted. "Alaris?" David said softly as she stopped tracing. "Sorry, it's hard to think about anything but that day when I see this scar," she said as her claws pulled away for her finger to press on the surface of the scar. "I was told after the battle that you most likely died, and the human medic refused to tell me anything when the general of your forces didn't tell me your condition." Her voice was choked as she forced her pain at the memory of that day back away from her mind. David rolled over and looked at her. Even in the darkness, he saw the flicker of tears. "I am sorry." David reached over and pulled her in, enveloping her in his arms. "Exonaut's Combat Corps has a rule about releasing information about their troops." He cradled her head with gentle strokes, while his other hand pressed her a bit. "How long did you stay down there?" she asked as she remembered she was evacuated on one of the last shuttles up. Her face buried into his chest, and her hands pressed against him. "Until the end," David said softly after a second. His word made her shudder at the idea of how much he fought, her voice giving to low gasps as she let out whines of pain, her tears running off her face and onto his chest. "Why didn't you leave to be treated?" she asked between inhales, her nose sniffling as her voice broke at every other word, her claws digging a bit into his chest. He gave her a few seconds to let her fear and pain at their shared history go a bit more. "Because that is who I am. The enemy was still before me, and my men still needed me to lead." His voice calm and soothing, an effort to reassure her that he wasn't going anywhere. "I couldn't leave with you. I needed to get your people's world back, and I did just that, before finding rest." Her claws dug a bit deeper, and her crying grew. She was meant to protect that world, and she didn't do that. His kind fought harder than her. But now her heart ached at the idea that the men she thought died for her was alive and still fighting. He saved her from her dark secret, one she felt he knew. His action was not to stop the droid, but stop her from embracing death and reaching the afterlands. But her weeping didn't stop him from comforting her. His hands tenderly holding her to him, his heart thundering rhythmically for her hands, his breath slow and controlled. He was giving her a chance to do something unthinkable to her kin, an invitation she took, as her mind summoned her memories of her first Pathrathin, Kianras's life with her, his care for her, the joy he gave her without conditions, his elation at the birth of Kiga, the care he showed to them both, the days he would return exhausted, yet still smiled wide for them both, his death an avoidable one. He wasn't strong or well-trained, but he pushed her and Kiga into their shuttle and waved, an uncertain smile plaguing him, a glint of happiness at their safety. He should have joined them, but he chose to fight. Her cry grew louder, yet muffled in his chest, as her mind relived the thousands of emotions she had felt with him, and the end was bitter to her, like a poison that ate away her desire to not make her pain audible. But her current love didn't let go. Her trauma not discouraging him, but invigorating his attention on comforting her and helping her soothe. His throat let a low hum go that pushed gently on her mind, its rhythm a lullaby of his kind, his hands supporting her, the power he possessed absent as he caressed her fur. He held her until she couldn't summon more tears, and her voice was gone. She had not displayed her grief even to Kiga, her pain at the loss of her Pathrathin, her first mate, one who had gifted her with support during her journey to find her place, one who ran alongside her with readiness and a will to protect her in any way he could, a will that took him from her. She had him, and he was all she wanted. She never looked for another, and never opened the door to others. Her fear of more loss and demand for vengeance pushed her to join the war effort and later broke down her will to fight. The deaths her enemies brought shattering her resolve and a wish to see him again. A hesitation that would have seen her time done, a slash that would have ended her suffering caught by the form of the man who now held her. This Titan who gave her a second chance with her daughter, who now supports her by lending his power to her, who had gifted her with a new child to awaken into the world. How could she not love him? How could she not be weak before him? His kin doesn't fear their emotions, and she has never really understood why. Until now, her heart had buried itself in her hate at first. But it felt hollow later, her desire to be loved by someone overshadowed by her pain at loss. And in the dark nightmare he came, carrying a torch of understanding, a compassion that her kin don't yearn for, yet he gave nevertheless. She pulled away her eyes, locking to his, a visage of concern clear on the surface, but beneath is a call to her happy again, and a request to see her smile with joy and a love of her evident to her mind. "David, I need to tell you something," she said with a harsh voice, one still sore from her muffled wails into his form. "That day on Kiandra's, I wasn't—" She stopped as his finger pressed her lips. "You don't need to tell me," he said slowly. "That is the past, and I know you were hurting. I could see it in your eyes when I blocked the hit." His hand moved, pushing a lock of hair out the way. "I wasn't trying to save you. I wanted to see my mother, so I had thrown myself in the way. But your eyes felt like a cry for me to fight, so I did. I wouldn't be here had we not sought the same thing that day." His voice broke a bit at the truth of his actions. They had both sought the same end, but she had instilled a will to fight in him, where he had given her pause to her darkening mind. "Oh, David," she said, as she pulled him into a kiss, the truth of his words clear, the darkness that grief can force them to, and the goddess's hand intervening to save them both. David walked into the mess hall just after Alaris, but was ripped away from his path, his eyes locked on Kiga, her visage show sheer anger, and she was joined by Yayuli and Jilris, and they all looked pissed, and David had a bad idea as to why. "Before any of you say anything, I ask that you look to Alaris first," David said quickly, gestured his hand her way. Their death glares shifted a bit and broke as they each watched her as she lined up. "She looks happy," Kiga muttered as she watched her mother talking with some of the human crew still in line. "Yeah, but we heard her crying. It was faint," Yayuli added, her hands relaxed. Jilris looked back to David, her eyes showing a clear confusion at what they thought was happening compared to the results. "What did you do?" David scratched at this stubble and sighed. "I didn't do much, but encouraged her to not hold her feeling back when I am next to her. The crying you must have heard was from her dealing with her memories of Kiga's sire," David said slowly and carefully, his tone ensuring he was sincere. "Why did you have her do that?" Kiga asked, her own will to hold her memories back showing in her eyes. David sucked in a breath. "Because she is my wife and partner with humans. We let our significant others display their emotions without judgment." David answered her, "I would recommend you speak with Cole about your sire and see how he reacts." Kiga turned and saw Cole as he sat with his fellow engineers, her hand coming to a careful stroke on her chin as she thought his words over. "So you are weakening the clan?" Yayuli scoffed at his suggestion. David snapped his head to her, making it clear who he was addressing. "No. Alaris is stronger because of my intervention. If you want to see for yourself, go and speak with her. I do believe that she has questions for you anyway." His voice sounded less like a suggestion and more akin to an order, one she flinched at before growling and walking away. "So you really are her Cosifane?" Jilris asked, her desire to know the truth of their relationship. "I am her Cosifane to ease the pack, but our true relationship is within the binds of my people's traditions. She will be my wife after we undergo a ceremony, and I will be her husband, each equal in trust, faith, and love, neither the dominant nor the submissive. I gift her my power to keep her control over this pack, and she gifts me a place to rest and be free," he said as his head shifted to lock on her, his voice clear and tone spoke of the truth in his words. "I accept the traditions of your kin to soothe her fear of being shunned. I respect her and wish her to have all she wishes. And if I must, I will use force to keep her as the leader. I trust you can understand what that means." Jilris froze a bit as her mind connected everything she knew of him and Alaris, and she nodded slowly. "I care about her deeply, and I am happy that she has you. Thank you for helping her deal with her turmoil," she said before leaving back to her seat. Kiga finally looked back to David, her eyes still showing fear and hesitation at the course of action he suggested. "Why are your kin so willing to display emotions?" she asked. Her voice carried an unease at her thoughts. Because our homeworld is deadly at worst, we have developed the understanding that emotions that are not expressed can slow you down and burden you, David said back as he placed a hand on her shoulder and slowly pulled her closer and hugged her. And while you can never get rid of them, expressing them will make them lighter on you and allow you to see past their primary cores and see everything they are. Grief can show you a desire to live, pain can teach you compassion, and fear can give way to courage. And you, Kiga, are just like your mother. You need to express yourself, so go to Cole and do so. He slowly released her and wiped a tear that had formed at the edge of her eye. Findra, David, why did she choose you to be her Kusifane? Kiga said as she pushed a bit more away. I don't know, but she is happy with me, and I am happy to be with her, David said before patting her shoulder and walking to join the line. David was allowed to slip up the line by some others, as Alaris had asked them to, and found himself next to her again. Her focus was on her chat with Emmy. They were discussing getting her a dress, and David couldn't contain his smile as she seemed to enjoy her conversation. David got up to the bridge shortly after breakfast, his head a bit sore at the immense amount of ideas that Emmy gave Alaris about their wedding, some of it impossible as they were on board a ship in the void of space. But Alaris was kind enough to take them as suggestions, her smile wide and giddy at some ideas that she found appealing, overall an enjoyable breakfast. He had also seen Kianris in line with Angela, pointing out options for him and informing him of some new food items. He looked like he didn't rest well, but for now, it didn't matter, as David had told to give him a day off from training. The bridge wasn't busy when he arrived. A few officers gave him a wide berth to pass, their fear of him still active in their minds. As he climbed the stairs up to the captain's chair, he thought over his request. Alaris seemed determined to have their wedding sooner than later. And her wish is his command. As he reached the last step, he shifted his head to allow the captain to believe that he was watching him. Captain, do you have a moment? David asked warmly. For the hero commander of Ja-Una Kul, I do. What can I help you with, David? The captain asked as he pulled away from the feed on his terminal. I am hoping you would be willing to participate in a ceremony of my people. It is similar to your kind's nest-folding ritual, David said with a gentle smile. Oh, you and Alaris, yes? The captain asked. Yes, sir, we have discussed it, and despite her kind's tradition for our union met already, she wishes to do my kin's too, David said. The captain stopped and froze, his mind recalling so old reports. So that's why the medical staff is so interested in your flock. Well, never mind. I gave Angela the power to make those decisions. The captain said after a few seconds. Yes, David, I would happily participate. Odd to think that this expedition has had so many firsts. First attempted murder, the first trial by combat between species, first Xandrafane ritual to have not one but 2 humans in it. The first time a first contact event became a battle, and now the first cross-species binding ritual. The council will likely lose their mind when we return. David smiled a bit harder, his teeth clenched tight in an effort from adding his mission to the captain's list. Yes, Captain, I'll send you your part in the ceremony, and thank you for allowing this. You are quite welcome, David. You are one of the most interesting officers I have ever had the pleasure of having aboard, the captain said with the foremost plumage atop his head, puffing out in happiness. David gave the captain a quick salute and left. His wish was to leave before he gets too deep into this clear, but he also had to see to some other things. David found Angela at her lab by a medical center. She was sitting on one of the stools, reading away at something on her tablet. Hey, Angela, you got a second? David asked, his hand taking off his visor as no one else was in the room. Sure, what's up? She said without leaving her reading. I got to see the doctor. She can't help, but she gave me the blueprint of the implant she recommends, David said as he found a chair for patients and fell into it, his head rolling over the backrest. Shit, can I see them? She asked, her head turning a bit to look at him. He shrugged and handed her the data chip. She took it and pulled the data after she plugged it into her tablet. She seemed to read the information slowly along with the procedure. So she can't do it because it would take a week to grow the contacts, she said finally after reading. Yep, and the captain seems ready to leave. He is just waiting for the supplies from Earth, so he will not wait a week just for me. David added to give context. Yeah, I get that we would be getting ready to leave by now, but we are idling until the resupply, Angela said as she closed the information. But I get the idea that this isn't what you want to talk with me about. David let himself smile. He can't lie to her even with information that she would be interested in. I was hoping you could fill me in on the chips situation, David said as he leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. Well, Samantha told me what she told you, so I'll skip that, she said as she pulled up her tablet and handed it over to him. I have reason to believe that the chips stifled the growth of those who had them implanted. So I tried running the genetic sequence of a few, and guess what I found? David cocked his brow, but she moved her hand displaying a genetic profile. It was clearly a Zandraphane, but his muscle mass was way above the average for their race, and his overall physical capabilities were close to that of an average human trooper. The genetic code is closely associated with an extinct sub-race of the Zandraphane people, she said with a bit of excitement. Their records call them a Yaivraphane. The best translation is blessed hunters. David cut her off, his grasp of Xandris good enough to translate the name as he read the information a bit more closely, spotting some unique changes from the average, like an adrenal gland and some of their fur missing in some key areas, and the existence of sweat pores. So you think the Keonris was meant to be this? That is possible. It looks like it is a genetic mutation that can happen, but the subrace was declared extinct for about a millennium, and it appears hereditary from the male line, Angela said as she displayed a bit more information. But here is where it gets weird. Every Zandradane I managed to scan has the code for it. The new information was Alaris's, and sure enough, a clear gene marker of the genetic code. It's like all the Zandradanes are these blessed hunter types, but most of the Zandraphanes aren't, and the ones who are implanted, Angela said with a mixture of interest and hope. Yeah, and you should know why the Republic wouldn't allow this, but the Conclave does. And no, they aren't extinct, just kept weak and controlled carefully, David said with a heavy voice. This changes everything. We don't tamper with genetics, and her leaders are doing it anyway. When can we get Keonris's chip out for a closer study? In 2 days, I'll be handling the surgery, Angela said after a second grasping what he said. I don't think Alaris knows about this. She did approve the procedure. David, you need to tell her. David locked his eyes on hers. She spoke the truth. The evidence of it was in her gaze back at him. I wouldn't even know where to begin. How do you tell someone that believes in their leaders that what they are doing is wrong and dangerous? David asked aloud, his wish for her to be happy, conflicted with his wish to do the right thing. Well, you are going to have to. Your child is showing a mutated gene marker. They will pass it down even if they are female, Angela said, her tone carrying the certainty of her skills. If they are scanned by her family, who knows what may happen, I don't want to know. David, if anything else, you have to tell Alaris the truth for your child's sake. David handed the tablet back and rested his head in his hands. So, I am cursed if I do. Cursed if I don't, he said before chuckling to himself and leaning back into the chair, his mind racing for a path, one that would give Alaris the reason behind his need to inform her, but without pushing her away. Do you think Keonris would recover from this? Can he still develop what he is missing if he is a Yaivaraphane? No, Angela said flatly. Whatever that chip did, it had done its job. Whatever chemical Keonris's body was meant to be active during his growth is no longer present in him. Even if we take out the chip, it's too late. Gaia, why did you make her my wife? David asked to the ceiling. Didn't realize that you became religious, David, Angela said as she put her tablet down. But you are doing better than you have for the past 7 years. I am not going to ask what happened, but I am happy. Alaris happened, David said after a second. Right. I think I have a plan. It is crazy stupid. I think I am going to have to break some more laws, but it's worth it. Well, good luck, and don't get me involved, Angela said as he stood up and headed to the door.